The wine splattered across the stone table like blood. Betty's wrist burned in Clinton's grip, crushing, deliberate, meant to break her in front of everyone who mattered. "Clumsy creature," he said, but the words weren't English. Ancient Lupin. The sacred language. Words he assumed she couldn't understand. No wolf, no worth. The gods must laugh that such emptiness wears a human face. Laughter erupted through the great hall. Nobles. Warriors. Lady Cordelia's tinkling giggle like breaking glass. Betty kept her eyes down, trembling exactly the way servants were supposed to tremble. But inside her mind, something cracked. Not fear. Something else. Something that had been sleeping for 7 years behind walls built from her mother's dying magic. And as Clinton released her wrist with a dismissive flick, turning back to his wine and his queen, Betty felt her teeth sharpen. Just slightly. Just enough. The Alpha King had made his first mistake in a language he thought she didn't speak. It would be his last. 7 months earlier, Betty's hands shook as she gripped the wine pitcher. The great hall of Shadowmere Castle stretched before her like a gauntlet of torchlight and cruelty, filled with warriors who'd carved their way across 3 continents. At the head of the massive oak table sat Clinton Pennington, bare-chested and crowned, his scarred body a testament to battles won, his dark eyes promising mercy to no one. Betty had learned to make herself invisible here. Eyes down, movements small, breathing shallow. In 7 months of scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots, she'd perfected the art of becoming nothing worth noticing. But nothing was exactly what she wasn't. More wine. Clinton's voice boomed across the hall, and Betty's heart kicked against her ribs. She approached the royal table, the clay pitcher heavy in her calloused hands, every step measured and careful. Lady Cordelia sat beside Clinton, golden-haired and beautiful in the way of predators, laughing at something whispered in her ear. Betty had watched Cordelia destroy 3 servants who'd displeased her, each one banished to the blood mines where few survived a season. The lady's cruelty was legendary, but Clinton found it amusing. Betty reached the table and began pouring wine into Clinton's goblet. Her hand trembled. Just slightly. Just enough. A single drop of dark liquid splashed onto the polished wood. The hall fell silent. Time seemed to fracture. Betty felt Clinton's hand shoot out before she saw it, his fingers clamping around her wrist with crushing force. Pain exploded up her arm. She gasped, finally looking up to meet his eyes. What she saw there froze her blood. Not anger. Amusement. The kind of amusement a cat shows a mouse before the killing bite. "Clumsy creature," Clinton said, but not in the common tongue. He spoke in ancient Lupin, the sacred language of the old Pax, the language Betty's mother had whispered to her in childhood lullabies and death prophecies. He couldn't possibly know she understood. "Look at this pathetic thing. No wolf, no worth. The gods must laugh that such emptiness wears a human face." The courtiers erupted in laughter. Most of them couldn't understand the archaic words, but they laughed because Clinton laughed, because to do otherwise was to invite his attention, and his attention meant suffering. But Betty understood every single word. Something deep within her, something that had been sleeping for 7 years behind walls of protective magic, stirred like a beast waking from hibernation. Welcome back to the channel, my dear friends. Before we dive deeper into the story, kindly click subscribe. Like this video, and tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. Your support helps me bring you more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Clinton released her wrist with a dismissive flick, turning back to Cordelia. "Sometimes I wonder if we should put them down mercifully rather than let them shuffle through life without their other half. What use is a human with no wolf?" Cordelia's tinkling laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, they're useful for cleaning up after real wolves. That's purpose enough, isn't it?" More laughter. More wine. The conversation moved on to war plans and conquered territories, to the upcoming lunar eclipse celebration that would cement Clinton's dominance over the northern and eastern Pax. Betty retreated, her heart hammering so violently she thought her ribs might crack. She made it to the servants' entrance before her legs gave out. She collapsed in the shadows of the stone corridor, pressing her hand against her mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to escape. Not a sob, a growl. She sat there in the darkness, trembling, while the truth Clinton had spoken in cruel jest echoed through her mind. No wolf. No worth. Empty. He had no idea how wrong he was. And that ignorance would be his undoing. Betty forced herself to stand, forced her legs to carry her through the warren of servants' corridors to the cramped quarters she shared with 3 other cleaners. They were already asleep, exhausted from 14-hour days of back-breaking labor. She lay on her thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, feeling something crack inside her mind. It was like ice breaking on a frozen lake, fractures spreading in every direction, each one releasing memories she'd been forbidden to access for 7 years. Her mother's face swam into focus. Queen Alara Moonwhisper, serene and terrible as she drew a silver blade across her own palm, blood welling up dark and sacred. This will hurt, my darling, but it will keep you alive. One day, when the time is right, she will return to you. And when she does, you will be unstoppable. Betty had been 17. The castle had been burning. Clinton's armies had already breached the outer walls of the Moonwhisper territory, his werewolf soldiers cutting through her family's guards like wheat before a scythe. The rite of severance was forbidden magic, older than civilization, more dangerous than death. It tore a wolf from its human counterpart's consciousness, locking it away in a prison built from the soul itself. The agony had been beyond screaming, beyond sanity. Betty had felt her wolf, her other half, her strength, her identity, being ripped away and sealed behind walls of desperate love and protective enchantment. The magic had saved her life by making her undetectable. Clinton's forces had slaughtered every wolf in the Moonwhisper pack, but they'd walked right past Betty, seeing only a traumatized human girl, not worth killing, not worth noticing. For 7 years, she'd lived as half a person, the phantom howl of her suppressed wolf echoing in dreams that left her gasping and hollow. She'd forgotten her real name, Betharian Moonwhisper, Luna's sovereign, last daughter of a bloodline that stretched back 1,000 years. She'd forgotten the weight of power, the feeling of shifting, the crystalline clarity of wolf senses. She'd become Betty Ramsdale, cleaner, invisible, nothing. But Clinton's words in ancient Lupin had been a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten existed. Another memory surfaced, sharp and terrible. Her mother's dying breath, gasped out as blood pooled beneath her on the castle floor. The alpha who humiliates you will kneel before you. The crown that sits upon his head will shatter. And you, my daughter, will become what he fears most, an alpha queen with nothing left to lose. Betty's hands began to shake, but this time not from fear. Deep within her, behind walls built from desperate love and protective magic, something ancient and furious was waking up. She understood now. The lunar eclipse wasn't just Clinton's celebration. It was her mother's final gift. The one celestial event powerful enough to break a rite of severance. Queen Alara had timed everything perfectly. 7 years of hiding. 7 years of waiting. 7 years for Clinton to grow comfortable in his conquest. To forget that Luna Queens didn't simply disappear. To believe his victory was complete and permanent. The eclipse was 7 months away. Clinton Pennington had made a fatal mistake tonight. He'd humiliated her in the language of alphas, in the sacred tongue of their kind, never imagining that the broken cleaner before him understood every syllable. Never imagining that his words weren't landing on deaf ears, but on a mind that was finally beginning to remember what it had been. What it would be again. Betty smiled in the darkness, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt teeth that were just a little too sharp. The Alpha King had sealed his own doom the moment he chose to humiliate her in the ancient tongue. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, Betty's reflection in the cracked mirror showed a stranger's eyes staring back. Silver flecks danced in irises that had been plain brown for 7 years. She blinked hard and they vanished, but the phantom sensation remained, like watching the world through water that was slowly draining away. Her wolf was clawing at the walls of her consciousness. "You look terrible," said Mara, one of her roommates, a thin woman with perpetually worried eyes. "Did you get enough sleep?" Betty forced a smile. Bad dreams. Bad dreams. What a pathetic way to describe the sensation of a stolen soul fighting its way back home. She dressed in her servant's uniform and joined the morning procession to the kitchens. Shadowmere Castle was a machine of hierarchy and cruelty, and the servants were its lowest gears. They received their assignments from Mistress Halloway, a hard-faced woman who'd been serving the Pennington bloodline for 30 years. "Betty, you're on the throne room today," Holloway announced, and Betty's stomach dropped. "Deep clean. The king wants it spotless for the Eclipse Planning Council this afternoon." Of course. 7 months until the lunar eclipse, and Clinton was already orchestrating celebrations. He had no idea he was planning his own funeral. Betty gathered her supplies, bucket, rags, polish, and made her way to the throne room. The massive chamber was empty this early, nothing but stone and shadows and the overwhelming scent of power. Clinton's throne sat on a raised dais, carved from black oak and inlaid with silver that had been melted down from conquered Pax sacred artifacts. Her mother's ceremonial crown was somewhere in that silver. Betty's hands clenched around her scrub brush hard enough to make her knuckles white. Rage bubbled up from somewhere deep, hot and violent, and for a terrifying moment she felt fur trying to sprout along her arms. No, not yet. Not here. She forced herself to breathe, forced the sensation back down. 7 months. She just needed to survive 7 more months. She was on her knees scrubbing the dais steps when footsteps echoed through the chamber. Betty kept her head down, expecting another servant or perhaps a guard. Well, the clumsy little mouse from last night. Cordelia's voice was honey over poisoned blades. Betty's heart rate spiked, but she kept scrubbing, kept her eyes down, kept playing the part she'd perfected over 7 months. Look at me when I speak to you. Cordelia's boot, expensive leather, probably cost more than Betty earned in a year, stepped into her field of vision. Betty looked up slowly, carefully arranging her face into an expression of fearful respect. Cordelia was even more beautiful up close, and even more cruel. Her golden hair was elaborately braided, her dress a creation of silk and emeralds that must have taken 3 seamstresses a week to complete. But it was her eyes that told the real story, pale blue and completely empty of empathy. "You embarrassed my betrothed last night," Cordelia said softly, spilling wine in front of the entire court. "Clumsy. Worthless. Do you know what happens to worthless things in this castle?" Betty did know. She'd watched it happen to others. But she said nothing, just kept her eyes lowered in submission. "They get sent to the blood mines." Cordelia crouched down, her dress pooling around her like a golden puddle. "Or if they're very lucky, they simply disappear one night. No one asks questions. No one cares." Something in Betty's chest growled. Not audibly. Not yet. But Cordelia must have seen something flicker across her face because the lady's eyes narrowed. "Are you glaring at me, little mouse?" "No, my lady. I apologize for last night. It won't happen again." The words tasted like ash, but Betty forced them out in a voice that trembled appropriately. Cordelia studied her for a long moment, then stood abruptly. "See that it doesn't. Clinton may find you amusing in your pathetic state, but I have no use for incompetence." She swept from the room in a rustle of silk, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and casual malice. Betty's hands shook as she returned to scrubbing. But this time, the trembling wasn't from fear. It was from rage held so tightly compressed it felt like her bones might shatter from the pressure. 7 months. Just 7 more months. The afternoon brought the Eclipse Planning Council, and Betty was ordered to remain in the throne room to serve refreshments. She stood against the back wall with 2 other servants, a pitcher of wine in her hands, and watched the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territories discuss their celebration. Clinton presided from his throne, crown glinting, every inch the conquering king. Around the great table sat his war chiefs, his advisors, and representatives from the Pax he'd subjugated. Betty recognized several of them. Wolves who'd fought against the Moonwhisper Pack 7 years ago, wolves who'd helped burn her home to the ground. "The lunar eclipse will be the perfect opportunity to announce our expansion into the Western Territories," Clinton was saying, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We've crushed the Eastern resistance. The Southern Packs are scattered. The West is ripe for conquest." "What about the Moonwhisper remnants?" asked Lord Ashford, a scarred wolf with gray streaking his beard. "There are still rumors that survivors escaped the initial purge." Betty's breath caught. She remained perfectly still, perfectly invisible against the wall. Clinton laughed, a sound like boulders rolling down a mountain. "The Moonwhisper line is extinct. We made certain of that. Their Luna Queen died screaming, their Alpha King died begging, and their precious princess," he waved a hand dismissively, disappeared into the chaos. Even if she survived, she'd be wolfless by now. Broken. Useless. The rite of severance her mother performed was witnessed by 3 of my soldiers before they killed the old witch. More laughter around the table. Casual. Comfortable. They thought the threat was eliminated. Betty poured wine with steady hands and screamed internally. They knew. They'd known what her mother had done. They'd known she'd survived. And they'd dismissed her as no threat because a severed wolf was as good as dead. They had no idea what was coming. "My lord," Cordelia purred from her seat beside Clinton. "Shouldn't we discuss the wedding arrangements? The eclipse would be the perfect time to formalize our union." Clinton's hand covered hers, and Betty watched the calculated intimacy between them. Political marriage. Power consolidation. Nothing about love, everything about dominance. "Indeed," Clinton said. "We'll combine the ceremonies. The eclipse celebration, our wedding, and the announcement of Western expansion. Let the entire continent witness the might of the Pennington reign." The meeting continued for another hour, detailing war preparations and celebration logistics. Betty absorbed every word, every plan, every name. Information was power, and she was gathering an arsenal. When the council finally adjourned and the throne room emptied, Betty was ordered to clean up. She was alone with the wine cups and half-eaten delicacies when she felt it again. That cracking sensation in her mind, like ice breaking apart. Memory flooded through. Her mother teaching her ancient Lupin when she was 5 years old. "This is the language of our ancestors, Betharian. The tongue of Luna Queens and Alpha Kings. It carries power in every syllable. Those who speak it command respect, wield authority, shape reality itself with their words." Clinton had used that sacred language to humiliate her. To call her empty. Worthless. Nothing. He'd violated something holy with his cruelty, and the universe itself seemed to be responding by tearing down the walls that kept her true nature hidden. Betty's hands began to glow. Just faintly. Just for a moment. Silver light danced across her skin like moonlight made solid, then faded as quickly as it had appeared. She stared at her palms, heart racing. It was happening faster than she'd anticipated. The rite of severance was breaking down ahead of schedule, destabilized by Clinton's use of ancient Lupin in her presence, by the memories it had triggered, by the rage it had unleashed. She might not have 7 months. She might have weeks. Maybe days. Betty cleaned up quickly and retreated to the servants' quarters. She needed to prepare. Needed to plan. Needed to figure out how to survive the return of her wolf without being discovered before she was ready. That night, she dreamed of running through forests that no longer existed, of silver moonlight on white fur, of a voice that was hers but deeper, wilder, ancient beyond measure. "Soon," the voice said. "Soon we will be whole again. And then, little sister, we will teach the Alpha King what true power looks like." Betty woke with tears on her face and the taste of blood in her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue hard enough to bleed. The countdown had begun, whether she was ready or not. 3 weeks passed, and Betty felt herself unraveling from the inside out. The silver flecks in her eyes no longer vanished when she blinked. She wore a servant's cap pulled low, kept her gaze down even more than before, but it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Her senses were sharpening. She could hear conversations 3 rooms away, smell the fierce sweat on other servants before they even entered a room, taste the copper tang of blood from the kitchens where meat was prepared. Her wolf was clawing through the barriers faster than her mother's magic could regenerate them. Worse, she was starting to remember everything. Not just fragments and flashes, but full, vivid memories of who Betharian Moonwhisper had been. A princess who'd trained with blade and claw since age 6. A Luna heir who'd mediated territorial disputes between packs 3 times her age. A girl who'd been groomed to rule with wisdom and strength. All of it had been locked away, and now it was flooding back like a dam breaking. "Betty, you need to eat something," Mara said one evening, watching her push food around her plate in the servants' dining hall. "You're wasting away." Betty forced herself to take a bite of bread, though it tasted like ash. Human food no longer satisfied. Her body was craving raw meat, moonlight, the thrill of the hunt. Cravings that had been dormant for 7 years were roaring back to life. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." Mara's worried expression said she didn't believe it, but she didn't push. In Shadowmere Castle, you learned not to ask too many questions about why someone was suffering. The answers were usually too terrible to bear. That night, Betty was assigned to evening service in the Great Hall again. Her stomach churned as she gathered linens and prepared wine pitchers. Being around Clinton had become physically painful. Her wolf recognized him as the enemy, recognized his scent as the same one that had soaked the ruins of her childhood home. Every instinct screamed at her to shift, to attack, to rip out his throat with teeth that were trying desperately to emerge. She gripped the edge of the serving table until her knuckles went white, forcing the transformation back down. Not yet. Not yet. She'd come too far to lose control now. The Great Hall was packed tonight, another feast, another celebration of Clinton's dominance. Betty moved through the crowds like a ghost, refilling cups, removing plates, invisible to everyone except when they needed something. She was near the royal table when she heard it. Cordelia's voice, pitched just loud enough for Clinton to hear, but low enough to seem private. "Darling, have you noticed that little mouse servant? The one from that embarrassing wine incident." Betty's blood turned to ice. She kept moving, kept her head down, but every sense suddenly focused on the conversation behind her. "Which one?" Clinton asked, distracted by the roasted boar in front of him. "The brunette with the sad eyes." "Betty, I think her name is." Cordelia paused, and Betty could hear the cruel smile in her voice. "There's something different about her lately. Something off. Her eyes look strange. And she moves differently. Almost like she's trying to hide something." Betty's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through her sternum. She forced herself to keep walking, to show no reaction, to be nothing worth noticing. "You think she's a spy?" Clinton asked, suddenly interested. "I think she's something. Maybe just sick. Maybe dangerous." Cordelia's voice dropped even lower. "I'd feel safer if she were investigated. Or removed. Would you trust Cordelia's instincts if you were Clinton? What would you do with a servant acting strangely in a castle full of enemies? Drop your thoughts below." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Betty's world had tilted on its axis. Cordelia suspected something, which meant Betty's time was running out faster than she'd thought. She made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities and escape routes. When the feast finally ended and she was dismissed, she didn't return to the servants' quarters. Instead, she slipped through the castle's shadows to a place she'd discovered weeks ago, an abandoned tower in the oldest part of Shadowmere, where no one went because the stairs were crumbling and dangerous. Betty climbed carefully, her newly sharpened senses guiding her through the darkness. At the top was a small circular room with windows that looked out over the castle grounds and beyond, to the forests in the distance. Her forests, or what had been her forests before Clinton burned them. She stood at the window and let herself feel everything she'd been suppressing. The rage, the grief, the bone-deep hunger for vengeance that had been growing since the night Clinton humiliated her in ancient Lupin. "I know you can hear me," Betty whispered into the darkness, speaking to the wolf locked inside her soul. "I know you're fighting to get out. Just hold on a little longer. We need a plan. We need to be smart about this." The response came not in words but in sensation, a wave of feral approval, of patience that had been tested for 7 years and wouldn't break now. Her wolf understood strategy, had been bred for war, could wait until the perfect moment to strike. Betty heard footsteps on the stairs below. Her head snapped toward the sound, every muscle tensing for fight or flight. A figure emerged from the shadows of the stairwell. Male, tall, moving with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. Betty's hand closed around a piece of broken stone, ready to fight, ready to do whatever it took to protect her secret. The moonlight through the window illuminated his face, and Betty's breath caught. She knew him. Lord Garrett Thornwood, one of Clinton's war chiefs. He'd been at the council meeting, at the feast tonight. He'd fought in the campaign against her family. They stared at each other for a frozen moment. "I'm not here to hurt you," Garrett said quietly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I followed you because I needed to know if what I suspected was true. I don't know what you're talking about." Betty kept the stone raised, ready to cave in his skull if necessary. "I got lost. I was just trying to find my way back." "Your eyes are glowing silver," Garrett said flatly. "And you're standing in an abandoned tower that's been sealed off for 15 years, which means you navigated a pitch-black stairwell in the dark without stumbling once. You're not human. Or at least, you're not entirely human anymore. Betty's mind raced through options. Kill him. That was the logical choice. But if she killed a war chief, the entire castle would be mobilized to find the murderer. She'd be discovered within hours. What do you want? She asked instead, her voice harder than it had been in 7 years. Garrett studied her with eyes that held none of Clinton's casual cruelty. I want to know who you really are. Because I've been watching you for weeks, and you move like someone who's had combat training. You listen to conversations you shouldn't be able to hear. And 3 nights ago, I saw you in the Great Hall when Clinton was speaking ancient Lupin to his advisors, and your lips moved along with the words. Nobody knows ancient Lupin anymore. Nobody except. Don't, Betty interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. Don't say it. Except the old bloodlines, Garrett finished anyway. The ruling families. The ones Clinton spent 7 years wiping out. They stared at each other, predator and predator, both calculating odds and outcomes. Why haven't you reported me? Betty asked finally. Garrett's jaw tightened. Because I'm starting to think I fought on the wrong side of a war. Because some of the things I did during the conquest keep me awake at night. Because Clinton isn't the righteous king he pretends to be, and his reign is built on mass graves and broken promises. Guilt won't save you, Betty said coldly. Nothing will save any of you when the reckoning comes. I'm not looking for salvation. Garrett took a step closer, and Betty raised the stone higher. He stopped, respecting the boundary. I'm looking for a chance to make things right. Or at least less wrong. Why would I trust you? You shouldn't. I wouldn't in your position. Garrett's expression was grim. But Cordelia is suspicious of you. She's already talking to Clinton about having you investigated. You have maybe 3 days before you're dragged to the dungeons and interrogated by wolves who'll be able to sense what you are the moment they get close enough. Betty's stomach dropped. 3 days. The lunar eclipse was still months away. What are you proposing? She asked carefully. I can buy you time. Misdirect the investigation. Maybe even help you disappear before they figure out the truth. Garrett's voice was steady, but Betty could hear his elevated heart rate. He was nervous. Good. He should be. But I need to know who you are. What you're planning. Because if you're who I think you are, then everything is about to change, and I need to decide which side of history I want to be on when it does. Betty weighed her options. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But allies were scarce, and she was running out of time. My name, she said slowly, each word carefully measured, is Betharian Moonwhisper. I am the Luna heir Clinton thought he'd destroyed. And in approximately 2 months, when the lunar eclipse breaks the rite of severance my mother used to hide me, I'm going to tear down everything he's built and make him beg for the mercy he never showed my family. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or fear. Possibly both. Then we need to accelerate your timeline, he said. Because Cordelia won't wait 2 months. She's planning to have you arrested tomorrow night during the feast. Which means if you want revenge, you're going to have to take it before you're ready. Betty's world tilted again. Tomorrow night. The words echoed through her skull like a death sentence. Her wolf snarled inside her mind, no longer patient, no longer willing to wait. The barriers were crumbling faster now, destabilized by stress and proximity to danger. She could feel her other half clawing toward the surface, desperate for freedom, hungry for blood. I can't control the shift, Betty admitted, the words tasting like failure. Not yet. If I try to fight before the right is completely broken, I could get stuck halfway. I'd be vulnerable. Weak. Then we don't let you fight alone. Garrett's voice was firm. There are others in the castle who've grown tired of Clinton's reign. Not many, but enough. If we time it right, if we coordinate. A coup, Betty interrupted. You're talking about a coup. I'm talking about justice. Garrett's eyes were hard as flint. Clinton murdered children during the Moonwhisper conquest. Entire families. He's done the same in every territory he's taken. Some of us have been waiting for someone brave enough or angry enough to stand against him. You're both. And tomorrow night might be our only chance. Betty's mind was racing. A coup. Tomorrow night. Before she was fully restored, before she had her complete strength back, before the lunar eclipse made her unstoppable. It was insane. It was suicide. It was also her only option. If I agree to this, Betty said carefully, and we fail, everyone who helps me dies. You understand that? Clinton doesn't leave loose ends. I'm already a dead man walking, Garrett said grimly. I've known that since I started questioning orders. At least this way, my death might mean something. Betty looked out the window at the castle grounds below, at the empire Clinton had built on bones and ashes. Somewhere in those halls was the man who destroyed her family, humiliated her in front of his entire court, called her worthless in the language of gods and queens. Tomorrow night, she would show him what worthless really looked like. How many, she asked. How many wolves can you guarantee? 12. Maybe 15 if I can reach the northern garrison by dawn. Garrett's voice was steady. It's not an army, but it's a start. Then here's what we do, Betty said, and began outlining a plan that would either liberate the northern territories or get everyone she cared about killed. Probably both. End of Chapter 3. Awaiting approval to continue. Character count, 11 for 47 characters. Chapter 4. 10:19 am. Chapter 4. The Feast of Reckoning. 24 hours. That's all Betty had to prepare for a rebellion that would either crown her or kill her. She spent the day moving through the castle in a daze of hyper-awareness, every sense dialed to maximum. Garrett had disappeared before dawn to recruit his allies, leaving Betty alone with a plan that felt more like a prayer than a strategy. 12 wolves against Clinton's entire garrison. 15 if they were lucky. The odds were suicide. But suicide was looking better than torture in Clinton's dungeons. Betty, are you listening? Mistress Halloway's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. I said you're serving the head table tonight. The king specifically requested additional servers for the feast. Lady Cordelia wants everything perfect. Of course she does, Betty thought. Perfect conditions for an arrest. Perfect audience for a humiliation. Yes, mistress, Betty said, her voice appropriately meek. I understand. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Betty went through the motions of her duties while her mind raced through contingencies and exit strategies. Her wolf was a constant presence now, no longer locked away, but prowling just beneath her skin, ready to emerge the moment Betty gave permission. The problem was control. The rite of severance wasn't completely broken yet, which meant her transformation would be incomplete, unpredictable, possibly catastrophic. She might shift into something between human and wolf, something grotesque and vulnerable. Or she might shift fully, but be unable to shift back, trapped in wolf form while her human mind screamed helplessly. Both scenarios ended with her dead. But doing nothing also ended with her dead, so really, what choice did she have? As sunset approached, Betty retreated to the abandoned tower one last time. She needed to center herself, to find some core of calm in the chaos of her racing thoughts. She was staring out the window when she felt it, a presence behind her, but different from Garrett's. This one was feminine, light-footed, carrying the scent of jasmine and old magic. Betty spun, her hand already reaching for the broken stone she'd hidden in her apron. An old woman stood at the top of the stairs, impossibly old, her face a map of wrinkles and her eyes sharp as broken glass. She wore robes that might have been gray or might have been every color at once, and she radiated power like heat from a forge. "Peace, little Luna," the woman said, her voice like wine through ancient trees. "I'm not your enemy." "Who are you?" Betty demanded, not lowering her makeshift weapon. "I am Grandmother Thorn, last of the Moon Oracles. I served your mother before the fall. I'm the one who taught her the rite of severance." The old woman moved closer with surprising grace. "And I'm here because you're about to do something monumentally stupid." Betty's throat tightened. "If you're here to stop me, stop you. Child, I'm here to help you survive." Grandmother Thorne's laugh was like rustling leaves. "Your mother didn't spend her last moments protecting you just so you could throw your life away on a half-baked coup attempt. I don't have a choice. Cordelia knows something's wrong with me. If I don't move tonight, I'll be in chains by morning." "I know. I've been watching." The oracle produced a small vial from her robes, filled with liquid that seemed to contain moonlight. "This is distilled essence of the last lunar eclipse. Your mother asked me to create it before she died, as insurance in case the rite needed to be broken early." Betty stared at the vial, hardly daring to hope. "That will complete the severance break? It will accelerate it." give you enough control to shift fully without getting stuck halfway. Grandmother Thorne pressed the vial into Betty's hand. But there's a price. There's always a price with magic this old. What price? The oracle's expression turned grave. When you drink this and complete your transformation, you'll have approximately 1 hour of full power. After that, the magic will burn out and you'll collapse. Your wolf will retreat back into dormancy for at least 3 days while your body recovers from the shock. If you're still fighting when the hour ends, you'll be defenseless. 1 hour. 60 minutes to overthrow a king, claim her birthright, and survive. It wasn't enough time, but it was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. 1 hour, Betty repeated, closing her fist around the vial. Then I'll make it count. Good girl. Grandmother Thorne's hand came to rest on Betty's cheek, surprisingly warm. Your mother would be proud of you. Terrified but proud. Now go. Prepare yourself. And remember, Clinton's greatest weakness isn't his arrogance. It's that he's forgotten what true Luna power looks like. Show him. Remind him. Make him remember why his ancestors feared your bloodline. The oracle vanished then, simply fading into shadows like she'd been nothing but smoke and starlight. Betty might have thought she'd imagined the whole thing, except the vial in her hand was solid and real and humming with barely contained power. She tucked it carefully into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her dress weeks ago, then made her way to the servants' preparation area. The great hall was already being set up for tonight's feast. Betty counted the exits, memorized guard positions, marked which servants she could trust to stay out of the way if violence erupted. Garrett had promised to position his rebel wolves strategically throughout the hall. She'd have to trust that he'd kept his word. Trust. Such a dangerous thing. As evening fell and guests began arriving, Betty took her position with the other servers. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears, a drumbeat counting down to revolution or ruin. Mara appeared beside her, looking anxious. Are you sure you're well enough for this? You look pale. I'm fine, Betty lied, managing a weak smile. Just nervous. Big feast tonight. The biggest, Mara agreed. Apparently Lady Cordelia has some kind of announcement. Everyone's speculating it's about the wedding date, or about a traitorous servant who needs to be made an example of, Betty thought. She squeezed Mara's hand briefly. Whatever happens tonight, stay near the kitchen entrance. If there's any trouble, get out fast. Promise me. Mara's eyes widened. Betty, what? Promise me. I promise. Mara looked terrified, but she nodded. The feast began with the usual fanfare. Clinton entered in full regalia, crown for cloak, enough jewelry to ransom a small kingdom. Cordelia glided beside him in a gown that probably cost more than the entire servants' quarters earned in a year. They took their places at the head table, and the festivities began. Betty served wine and removed plates, her movements automatic while her mind focused on the vial in her pocket. She was waiting for Garrett's signal. He'd said he would create a distraction when his wolves were in position. Until then, she played her part. An hour passed. Then another. Betty's nerves stretched tighter with each passing moment. Where was Garrett? Had he been discovered? Had Clinton already rounded up the rebels? Then she saw it. Garrett entered the great hall in his war chief uniform, his expression carefully neutral. He moved through the crowd, exchanging brief words with specific individuals. Betty counted them off. 1, 3, 7, 12. 12 wolves. Against an army. This was insane. Garrett's eyes met hers across the hall. He gave the smallest nod. It was time. Betty's hand closed around the vial in her pocket. She was near the servants' entrance, about 30 feet from the head table. Cordelia was laughing at something Clinton had said, her hand possessively on his arm. Neither of them had noticed Betty yet. They were about to. Betty uncorked the vial and drank. The liquid burned going down, tasted like starlight and rage and her mother's last breath. Power exploded through her veins like lightning through water. She felt the rite of severance shatter completely, felt 7 years of suppressed wolf nature come roaring back to full consciousness. The transformation hit her like a freight train. Her bones began to break and reform. Her skin rippled with emerging fur. Her teeth lengthened into fangs. But unlike the horror stories of half-shifts, this was controlled, powerful, perfect. Grandmother Thorne's potion was doing its work. The great hall fell silent as Betty Ramsdale, invisible servant, broke apart and became Betharian Moon Whisper, Luna Sovereign. She completed the shift in seconds, a massive silver wolf that glowed with the light of 1,000 moons, easily twice the size of a normal werewolf, her eyes blazing with power that made every wolf in the hall instinctively lower their heads in submission. Except one. Clinton Pennington rose from his throne, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. "Impossible," he breathed. "The Moon Whisper heir is dead." Betty's wolf form stalked toward the head table, and the crowd parted like water before her. She could feel Garrett's rebels moving into position, blocking exits, surrounding Clinton's personal guards. When she was 10 feet from the dais, Betty shifted back to human form. The transformation was seamless, effortless, and she stood before the king in her servant's dress, silver light still dancing across her skin. "Hello, Clinton," she said in perfect ancient Lupin, her voice carrying the authority of 1,000 years of Luna Queens. "Remember me? The pathetic, worthless thing you humiliated in the sacred tongue? The empty creature you said should be put down mercifully?" Clinton's hand went to his sword, but Garrett was already there, blade pressed against the king's throat. "I wouldn't," Garrett said quietly. "You're surrounded." Cordelia screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure terror. Several of Clinton's loyalists tried to rush forward, but Garrett's rebels intercepted them. The great hall erupted into chaos. Betty didn't flinch. She climbed the dais steps slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Clinton's face. She wanted him to see her. To really see her. To understand exactly what he'd done when he'd chosen to mock a Luna heir in the language of gods. "You asked what use a human without a wolf could have," Betty said, circling him like the predator she was. "Let me show you." She moved faster than human eyes could track, her hand closing around Clinton's throat. With inhuman strength, she lifted him off his feet and slammed him to the ground. His crown rolled away, clattering down the dais steps. The sound of it hitting stone was the sweetest music Betty had ever heard. "7 years ago, you burned my forests," Betty said, her voice rising to fill the hall. Every wolf present could hear her, could feel the power in her words. "You murdered my family. You slaughtered thousands of innocent wolves. And you built your reign on their bones." Clinton struggled in her grip, but it was useless. Luna power was flowing through her now, ancient and unstoppable. "I spent 7 years as nothing," Betty continued. 7 years invisible, powerless, empty, just like you said. "And do you know what I learned in that time?" She leaned down, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. "I learned patience. I learned strategy. I learned that the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The one you dismiss. The one you humiliate and forget." Betty released his throat, but kept him pinned with one foot on his chest. She looked up at the assembled crowd, nobles and warriors and servants, all frozen in shock. "Clinton Pennington built his empire on terror and broken promises," she announced. "He called himself king, but he's nothing but a tyrant. And tonight that ends." She reached down and picked up the fallen crown, holding it aloft where everyone could see. "I am Betharian Moon Whisper, last heir of the Luna sovereignty. By right of blood and conquest, I claim dominion over these territories. Any who stand with Clinton Pennington, step forward now. Any who seek a better way, stand down." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of Clinton's war chiefs dropped his sword. Then another. Then 10 more. The cascade had begun. Cordelia bolted for the exit, but one of Garrett's wolves caught her, dragged her back. She fought and screamed, but it was over. Betty looked down at Clinton, saw the fear finally blooming in his eyes. Good. Let him feel what her family had felt. Let him taste terror and helplessness and the bitter knowledge that everything was about to end. "You called me empty," Betty said softly just for him. "But you're the one who's hollow. You're nothing but violence and ambition. And when I'm done with you, you'll be nothing at all." She raised the crown high, then brought it down with crushing force. It shattered against the stone floor, breaking into pieces that would never be whole again. Just like Clinton's reign. Just like her family had been broken 7 years ago. The circle was complete. The great hall had become a courtroom of wolves. Betty stood over Clinton's prone form, power still crackling across her skin like visible electricity. Around them, Chaos had frozen into tense stillness. Garrett's rebels held key positions throughout the hall, their weapons trained on Clinton's remaining loyalists. The nobles and warriors who'd bent the knee to Clinton minutes ago now watched with calculating eyes, weighing odds, measuring loyalties, deciding which way the wind was blowing. Betty could feel the hour ticking away. Grandmother Thorne's potion was burning through her system, granting her this window of invincibility. But the clock was running, and she had so much left to do. "Bind him," she ordered, and 2 of Garrett's wolves rushed forward with silver chains. Clinton fought, but 3 more wolves joined in, and even an alpha king couldn't fight off 5 trained warriors while still reeling from shock. They hauled him to his knees, chains wrapped around his wrists and throat. The silver burned his skin where it touched, raising angry welts. Good. Betty wanted him to hurt. Wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted on thousands. Cordelia was dragged forward next, still screaming obscenities. "You'll die for this. All of you. The other territories will never accept a Moonwhisper heir. They'll crush you like the pathetic." Betty's hand shot out, gripping Cordelia's jaw hard enough to cut off her words. The lady's eyes went wide with terror as she stared into Betty's silver-glowing gaze. "The adults are talking," Betty said softly. "Sit down and be silent, or I'll rip your tongue out and solve the problem permanently." She released Cordelia, who collapsed to the floor, finally shocked into silence. Betty turned to address the assembled crowd. Her voice rang out with the authority her mother had trained into her since childhood. The voice of a Luna sovereign, a queen who'd been born to rule. 7 years ago, Clinton Pennington launched a campaign of genocide against the Moonwhisper Pack. He called it conquest, called it unification, called it necessary for the greater good. Betty's eyes swept across the faces staring up at her. But we all know what it really was. Mass murder. The systematic elimination of anyone who might challenge his reign. She began to pace, her movements predatory, controlled. "He didn't stop with my family. In the years since, he's done the same to a dozen other packs. The Riverside Wolves, the Mountain Ridge Clan, the Coastal Territories. How many of you have lost family members to Clinton's unification? How many have watched your lands burned, your traditions destroyed, your children conscripted into his armies?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Betty saw recognition in dozens of faces, grief, rage, loss that had been suppressed under fear of Clinton's reprisal. "He ruled through terror," Betty continued. "Anyone who questioned him disappeared. Anyone who resisted was made an example of. He turned wolf against wolf, brother against sister, until we forgot what it meant to be a pack. We became scattered, fearful, broken." She stopped pacing and stood at the edge of the dais, looking down at the crowd. But here's what Clinton forgot. What every tyrant eventually forgets. Fear only works until someone decides they have nothing left to lose. And then the whole system collapses. Betty turned back to Clinton, who glared at her with pure hatred. His mouth opened, words forming in ancient Lupin, probably a curse, maybe a threat. Betty's hand shot out, gripping his throat again. "No, you don't get to speak anymore. You don't get to use the sacred language to spew your poison. You use those holy words to humiliate me, to mock me, to call me worthless in the tongue of our ancestors. That was your first mistake. And your last." She released him and straightened, addressing the crowd again. "I'm not here to replace one tyrant with another. I'm not interested in ruling through fear or building an empire on bones. But I am here to deliver justice. Real justice. The kind that's been denied for 7 years. What are you proposing?" called out Lord Ashford, the scarred war chief who'd questioned Clinton about Moonwhisper survivors. "A trial? Exile? Execution? I'm proposing we let the people decide." Betty's words caused a stir of surprise. Every pack Clinton subjugated, every family he destroyed, every wolf who suffered under his reign, they all get a voice. "We'll send messengers to every territory. Gather representatives. Hold a true council, not the puppet show Clinton's been running." "That could take weeks," Garrett interjected. "Clinton's loyalists won't sit idle that long. They'll regroup, launch a counterattack. Then we move fast and we move smart." Betty's mind was already racing through logistics. "Garrett, you'll lead the effort to secure the castle and the surrounding territories. Send riders to the border packs. Tell them Clinton's reign is over and the Luna sovereignty has been restored. Any who resist will face the consequences. She turned to another of Garrett's rebels, a female wolf with commander's bearing. What's your name? Kira Shadowbane, my lady. Kira, you'll oversee securing Clinton's weapons caches and treasury. Make an inventory of everything. I want to know exactly what resources we're working with. Orders flowed from Betty with the ease of someone who'd been trained from birth to command. She assigned tasks, delegated responsibilities, organized the chaos into something resembling structure. The wolves in the hall responded instinctively to her authority. This was Luna power in action, the magnetic pull that made others want to follow, to serve, to believe. But beneath the surface, Betty could feel the potion burning out. Her muscles were beginning to ache. The silver glow around her skin was dimming. Maybe 15 minutes left. 20 if she was lucky. She needed to finish this. As for you, Betty said, turning back to Clinton. She crouched down to his level, meeting his hateful gaze. You're going to live. For now. You're going to sit in a cell and wait while we gather every wolf whose life you destroyed. And then you're going to face them. You're going to hear their stories, their losses, their pain. And when they've all spoken, when every voice has been heard, then, and only then, will we decide your fate. You think they'll show you mercy? Clinton spat, finding his voice finally. They're wolves, not sheep. They'll rip me apart. Maybe they will, Betty said quietly. Maybe that's exactly what justice looks like. But unlike you, I'm going to give them the choice. I'm not going to make decisions for everyone else and call it leadership. She stood, nodding to the guards. Take him to the deepest cell. Silver chains. Triple guard. If he escapes, everyone on duty dies. Clear? Crystal, my lady. As Clinton was dragged away, still fighting against his chains, Cordelia tried to scramble to her feet. Please, she gasped, all her earlier arrogance gone. Please, I didn't know who you were. I was just following Clinton's orders. I never hurt anyone personally. You sent 3 servants to the blood mines for minor infractions, Betty interrupted coldly. 2 of them died there. The 3rd lost her mind. So don't tell me you never hurt anyone. Cordelia's face went white. I can make amends. I have resources, connections. I can help you consolidate power. I don't need your help. And I certainly don't need your connections. Betty's voice was hard as iron. You'll face the same justice as Clinton. The same counsel. The same judgment. Maybe they'll be merciful. But I wouldn't count on it. Cordelia was dragged away, sobbing now. All her beauty and cruelty stripped down to raw terror. The great hall was emptying as wolves dispersed to follow Betty's orders. Within minutes, only Garrett and a handful of trusted rebels remained. That was incredible, Garrett said quietly. I've never seen anyone command a room like that. Your mother would have been. He stopped as Betty swayed, catching herself against the dais. The potion had burned out. She could feel her wolf retreating, feel the exhaustion slamming into her like a physical blow. I need to sit, she managed, and Garrett caught her as her legs gave out. How long do you have? He asked urgently. Already gone. I'm running on fumes. Betty's vision was starting to blur. 3 days, the oracle said. I'll be vulnerable for 3 days while my body recovers. Then we need to get you somewhere secure. Garrett lifted her easily, calling out to Kira. Clear the royal chambers. Full security detail. No one gets in without my direct approval. The royal chambers? Betty tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. That's Clinton's room. Was Clinton's room. Now it's yours. You're the Luna Sovereign. Start acting like it. They moved through the castle corridors, past servants and guards who were still processing what had happened. Betty saw shock on every face, fear mixed with hope, the dawning realization that everything had changed in the space of an hour. The royal chambers were obscenely luxurious, silk sheets, golden fixtures, a bed large enough for 5 people. Betty felt a surge of disgust looking at it. This was where Clinton had slept while her people suffered. Burn the sheets, she ordered. Actually, burn all of it. I want every trace of him gone. We'll redecorate tomorrow, Garrett promised, laying her on the bed despite her protests. Right now, you need to rest. Your body just went through a transformation that should have killed you. Give it time to recover. I don't have time. Betty tried to sit up, but her muscles refused to cooperate. There's too much to do. The messengers need to. Are already being sent. Kira's handling it. I'm handling the security. The rebellion you started is spreading through the castle like wildfire. Everyone's working. Garrett's expression was gentle but firm. Your part is done for now. Let others carry the weight while you recover. Betty wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a riptide. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Hadn't felt safe in 7 years. And now, with Clinton in chains and revolution burning through Shadowmere, her body was simply shutting down. If anything happens, she started. Nothing will happen. You have my word. Garrett pulled a blanket over her. Sleep, my lady. The revolution can survive without you for a few hours. Betty's eyes were already closing. The last thing she saw was Garrett posting guards at the door, his war chief's efficiency ensuring her safety even in vulnerability. She dreamed of her mother. Queen Alara stood in the ruins of their castle, silver light glowing around her, blood on her hands from the rite of severance. You did it, darling, her mother whispered. You survived. You grew strong. You remembered who you were. I'm so proud of you. Is it over? Betty asked in the dream. Did I win? You won the battle. The war isn't finished yet. Alara's expression turned serious. Clinton was just one tyrant. The system that created him still exists. The territories are still fractured. There are wolves who'll resist your claim, who'll see you as a threat rather than a savior. I know. I'm ready. Are you? Her mother's hand came to rest on Betty's cheek. Because the hardest part isn't defeating your enemies, darling. It's rebuilding after they're gone. It's turning rage into justice, vengeance into healing. Can you do that? Can you be more than what Clinton made you? Betty woke with tears on her face and pale morning light streaming through the windows. She sat up carefully, testing her body. Still weak, still exhausted, but functional. The 3-day recovery period had apparently been shortened. Maybe because she'd only used the potion's power for 45 minutes instead of a full hour. A servant, not one she recognized, was laying out fresh clothes on a nearby chair. The girl jumped when she saw Betty was awake. My lady. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb. It's fine. Betty's voice was rough from sleep. What's the situation? Lord Garrett requests your presence in the council chamber when you're able. Representatives from 3 territories arrived overnight. More are expected by evening. The servant hesitated. There are also complications. Some of Clinton's war chiefs have barricaded themselves in the eastern garrison. They're refusing to surrender. Of course they were. Betty had known this wouldn't be clean. Tell Garrett I'll be there within the hour. She paused. What's your name? Ivy, my lady. Thank you, Ivy. And you don't have to call me my lady. Betty is fine. Ivy's eyes widened in shock. Ah, yes, my. Betty. After Ivy left, Betty dressed in the clothes that had been laid out. Not a servant's uniform this time, but proper attire befitting a Luna. The fabric was fine, the cut elegant but practical. She braided her hair back, noting that the silver streaks that had appeared during her transformation were still there, running through the brown like threads of moonlight. She looked different. Older. Harder. The girl who'd scrubbed floors and kept her eyes down was gone. In her place stood someone who'd stared down a tyrant and won. Betty made her way to the council chamber, where Garrett and Kira were deep in conversation with 3 wolves she didn't recognize. They all turned when she entered, and she saw the same thing in each face, all mixed with uncertainty. They weren't sure what to make of her yet. Weren't sure if she was savior or just a different kind of tyrant. Fair enough. She wasn't entirely sure herself. Report, she said, taking the seat at the head of the table. Clinton's seat. Her seat now. Garrett outlined the situation. The Eastern Garrison was holding 40 of Clinton's most loyal fighters, including 2 of his senior war chiefs. They were well-armed and prepared for a siege. Meanwhile, representatives from the Riverside, Coastal, and Mountain Ridge packs had arrived, all demanding audiences, all wanting to know what Betty's claim to power actually meant for their territories. The Riverside Wolves are particularly agitated, Kira added. They lost over 300 pack members in Clinton's campaign 5 years ago. They want immediate assurances that you're not just continuing his policies under a different name. Then let's give them those assurances. Betty stood, moving to the large map that dominated one wall. It showed the Northern Territories in intricate detail, every pack, every settlement, every strategic position. Here's what we're going to do. First, we negotiate with the Eastern Garrison. I don't want a bloodbath if we can avoid it. Offer them safe passage out of the territories in exchange for surrender. They can leave with their lives, but nothing else. They'll never accept that, Garrett said. They'll see it as weakness. Then they're welcome to sit in that garrison until they starve. But we make the offer first. I meant what I said last night. I'm not building a reign on unnecessary violence. Betty's finger traced the territories on the map. Second, we meet with each pack representative individually. I want to hear their grievances, understand their needs, show them that this isn't another power grab. It's a genuine chance to rebuild. She turned to face them. I know some of you are wondering if I'm strong enough to hold power. If I'm too soft, too idealistic. But here's the thing, Clinton ruled through fear, and look where it got him. Chained in a dungeon, waiting for judgment. I'm going to try something different. Something radical. I'm going to try listening. The council chamber fell silent. Then one of the visiting representatives, a gray-haired wolf with scars across his face, spoke up. I'm Aldrich of the Riverside Pack. My mate and 2 of my children died in Clinton's conquest. His voice was rough with old grief. I came here expecting another tyrant. Someone who'd seized power and would hold it with the same iron fist. But if what you're saying is true, if you're genuinely offering something different, then you have my support. Conditional support, until you prove yourself. But support nonetheless. That's all I'm asking for, Betty said. A chance to prove I'm not him. A chance to build something better. The days that followed were a blur of negotiations, meetings, and difficult conversations. Betty met with representatives from every pack Clinton had conquered, listening to stories of loss and trauma that made her want to weep. She negotiated the surrender of the Eastern Garrison. It took a week, but they finally accepted her terms when she offered to let them join outlying packs rather than face exile. She presided over the first session of Clinton's trial, where 20 survivors gave testimony that was so harrowing even the hardest warriors present had tears in their eyes. Through it all, Betty felt herself changing. The rage that had sustained her through 7 years of servitude was transforming into something more complex. Determination, yes, and a fierce protective instinct for the wolves under her care, but also a kind of weary wisdom. She was learning that justice was more complicated than vengeance, that leadership was more exhausting than rebellion. 3 weeks after the coup, the council reconvened for Clinton's final judgment. Betty stood before the assembled representatives. 30 packs, over 100 wolves, all gathered to decide the fate of the tyrant who'd tormented them for 7 years. We've heard the testimony, Betty said. We've documented the crimes. Now comes the hard part. What do we do with him? The debate lasted hours. Some called for execution. Others wanted exile. A very few, argued for mercy, claiming that killing Clinton would make them no better than he was. In the end, the vote was nearly unanimous. Death. Quick and clean, more mercy than he'd ever shown anyone else, but death nonetheless. Betty was the one who carried out the sentence. She'd earned that right. In the courtyard at dawn, with witnesses from every pack present, she stood before Clinton Pennington one final time. Any last words? She asked in ancient Lupin. Clinton met her eyes. For a moment, she saw something other than hatred there. Resignation, maybe. Or acceptance. You were right, he said quietly. The most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. I should have looked closer. Yes, Betty agreed. You should have. She made it quick. One clean strike, severing his head from his shoulders. He died without screaming, without begging. She'd give him that much dignity. As his body fell, Betty felt something release inside her. Not relief exactly. Not satisfaction. Just completion. The circle that had begun 7 years ago in the burning ruins of her childhood home had finally closed. She wiped the blood from her blade and turned to face the assembled wolves. It's done. Clinton Pennington's reign is over. Now we begin the real work, building something worth protecting. Building a society where power doesn't corrupt, where wolves can live without fear, where justice is more than just a word we say before we execute someone. She paused, looking out over the faces watching her. I'm not asking you to follow me blindly. I'm asking you to help me, to challenge me when I'm wrong, to support me when I'm right, to hold me accountable so I never become what Clinton was. Can you do that? The response was a roar of approval that echoed across the castle grounds. That night, alone in her chambers, Betty stood at the window and looked out over Shadowmere. The castle that had been her prison was now her responsibility. The man who'd humiliated her was dead. The revenge she'd dreamed of for 7 years was complete. So why did she feel so empty? Because revenge is a beginning, not an ending, said a familiar voice behind her. Betty turned to find Grandmother Thorne sitting in a chair by the fire, looking exactly as she had in the abandoned tower weeks ago. The hard part starts now, the oracle continued. Killing Clinton was easy compared to what comes next. You have to prove you're worthy of the power you claimed. You have to turn a fractured collection of traumatized packs into a functioning society. You have to be the leader they need, not just the avenger they wanted. I know, Betty said quietly. I'm terrified I'll fail. Good. Fear will keep you honest. Grandmother Thorne smiled. Your mother was terrified too, every single day she ruled. But she did it anyway. And so will you. The oracle faded, leaving Betty alone with her thoughts and the weight of a crown she'd never actually wanted. But she'd wear it anyway, because that's what Luna sovereigns did. They carried the weight so others didn't have to. Betty Ramsdale, Betharian Moon Whisper, last heir of the Luna sovereignty, turned away from the window and got to work. The revolution was over. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, the lunar eclipse finally came. Betty stood in the courtyard of Shadowmere, no longer a fortress of fear, but a center of governance and healing, and watched the moon disappear behind the shadow of the earth. Around her stood representatives from every territory in the north, wolves who'd come to witness what Clinton had planned as a celebration of dominion and what had become a memorial for all they'd lost. We gather here not to celebrate conquest, Betty said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd, but to remember those who didn't survive to see this moment. The families destroyed, the traditions lost, the futures stolen. We remember them, and we promise to build something worthy of their sacrifice. As the eclipse reached totality and the moon vanished completely, Betty felt her wolf surge forward one final time. Not in transformation, but in communion. She and her other half were finally, truly whole. No barriers, no separation, just 2 parts of one complete being. She threw back her head and howled, a sound of grief and triumph and hope all woven together. And across the courtyard, across the territories, across the continent, thousands of wolves joined her in a symphony of mourning and renewal that echoed through the night. The Alpha King who'd humiliated her in an ancient tongue was gone. The Luna Queen who would rebuild what he'd destroyed had only just begun. If Betty's journey from humiliated servant to Luna Queen captivated you, subscribe to this channel for more powerful werewolf stories where the underestimated rise and tyrants fall. Like this video if you believe Clinton got exactly what he deserved, and drop a comment telling us. Would you have shown him mercy, or would you have done what Betty did? And tap the video on your screen right now to discover another werewolf fantasy where ancient bloodlines, forbidden magic, and deadly revenge collide in ways you won't see coming. Don't miss it.